Hello, everyone. Welcome. Come on in. Sorry, we were a minute late there opening the door. Had a couple of tech issues. So thank you for being here with us today. Come on in and get settled. You are here with the Northeastern Caribbean Prevention Technology Transfer Center at Sharpening Your Prevention Tools, developing sustainability plans that work. So while we are letting folks in from the waiting room, would you take a look at just sort of our first question, our first sort of thought exercise? How do you define sustainability? What is sustainability? And if you just start thinking about that for the rest of our program, and you could also share in the chat with us, that would be lovely as well. And oh, we are filling up quickly. Thank you. Hi, good morning. Good morning. Good morning. Good afternoon, too. I looked at the registration list for this session, and it's amazing. We have people from all over, and we are thrilled. We are absolutely thrilled about that we are bringing a session that is of value and meaningful for all of you. And we're really pleased that we're able to do that and that you were able to be here with us today. All right, for purposes of time, I'm going to get started. Let's just take a quick look at what is sustainability for everybody. Let's just take a quick look at what is sustainability. Lifestyle, creating a plan that lasts, both those things, right? They kind of go together. Your lifestyle, would be something that that endures, right? Creating a plan that lasts, that's what we're hoping for, right? So that this is some way to continue your prevention work, even after some things, maybe kind of important things have shifted. People, funding, that kind of thing. Survival without grants so we can focus on our work. That is the truth. That is the truth. The ability to continue to provide services after some change. Wonderful. That's so wonderful. And I think that we will have some really good conversations during today's session to get to some of those issues in a practical and meaningful fashion. And making sure our coalition members and community can function without federal DFC dollars. Yes, all of these things. Thank you so much for participating in that. And we're going to officially get started now. So today's session is Sharpening Your Prevention Tools, developing sustainability plans that work. And this is the first in a series of sort of tool-based sessions that our PTTC will be doing over the next few weeks. Next week, we'll be doing a session on using strategic plans, moving from vision to action. And the following week, we'll be doing a session on logic modeling. If you have any interest in those and you haven't yet signed up, we will make arrangements for you to have information about how to sign up for those sessions. So today's session is with Emily Bargov of Education Development Center and Jess Goldberg, also of EDC. And my name is Claire Neary. I'm the project coordinator for the Northeastern Caribbean Prevention Technology Transfer Center. And if we could have the next slide. This is our technical information slide. It's a very busy slide. And so I won't read it all. You will be getting a copy of the slide deck after the session. And so you'll be able to read through this at your leisure. A couple of things of note, though, are that this session is being recorded and we will be posting it to our PTTC website at the end. You'll be getting a copy of that recording from us, as well as a copy of the slides. And we also do certificates of attendance. We send those out. I'll send those out to those who have participated in full, have attended in full. And I want to also just take a moment and acknowledge our funders. Our funders are SAMHSA, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration of the federal government. And they, all of our services, our trainings and any other services from the PTTC network come to all of you free of charge because of that funding. And so I want to acknowledge them. And then if we could have the next slide, I want to mention that at the end of our session, you'll see a slide like this, which is our evaluation. You can take it either through the URL or that QR code. They both will bring you to the same place. It'll take you about 5 to 8 minutes. to participate. And I want to encourage you to do it for two reasons. One is we believe that all feedback is good feedback. And we really do read all the feedback and incorporate it into our next session and our going forward mechanisms. So we do read it, we do take it seriously, and your opinion matters to us. Your needs matter to us. And the other thing is that just by taking it, we report some of that information, back to the funders, and just having people participate in it lets our funders know that their money is being used for what they intended, which is to provide training and increase the capacity of the prevention workforce throughout the United States. And if we could have the next slide. This is a session this is a slide we try to start our sessions with this slide throughout the PTTC to acknowledge formally that language matters and words have power, and that our goal is to continuously be doing our sessions and developing our content with the concept of people come first. So the PTTC network as a whole and our PTTC use affirming language to promote the application of evidence-based and culturally informed practices. And we just want to take a moment and acknowledge that. And the next slide. This is, you've probably seen this, but just in case, I'll just say it briefly. This slide illustrates the PTTC network as a whole. So there are 10 regional centers and 2 cultural centers of excellence and identification. And our PTTC is the Northeast and Caribbean PTTC. We cover the HHS Region 2, so Health and Human Services Department Region 2. It's gray blue, top right, bottom right. So that's New York, New Jersey, the United States Virgin Islands, and Puerto Rico. But I know that you all are from everywhere, and we are very happy to have all of you here. And the next slide. I think I'm going to tell you a little bit about our presenters. Yes, we are. So Jess Goldberg is a training and technical assistance specialist with Education Development Center, which is a partner to us here at our PTTC. She's a certified prevention specialist and a highly skilled trainer. For over a decade, she has specialized in building capacity to improve health, mental health, and behavioral health. And her areas of expertise include, but are not limited to, prevention, preventing youth substance use, promoting cross-sector collaborations, addressing health disparities. And if you've been with us previously, you have had the pleasure of Jessica's trainings. Also with us today is a special guest, Emily Barga. She is also with EDC, and she is an expert in facilitation, strategic, and sustainability planning, and she has led community-level health promotion efforts for over 15 years. She's also an expert in the prevention of substance misuse, violence, suicide, teen prevention, and a host of other areas that are related to health and well-being at the individual and community level. So you are working today with some really serious practical experts, and we are so pleased to have all of you here today. And I think now we will go to our roadmap, and then we will move on to the experience itself. The roadmap for today is we will be looking at an overview of sustainability, and then we'll be doing an interview with an expert, and we'll do some audience Q&A. I want to encourage everyone to use the chat. I want to encourage everyone to, there's no, every question is welcome. And any question that we can't do during the course of the session, we will get to you after the session. So please, we want this to be as interactive as possible. And now I'm going to hand over to Emily, and she will get you started on this experience.
All right. Hi, everyone. Clara, can you? Yep. All right. So as Claire told you, we are going to begin with an overview of sustainability. Just think broadly, what does that mean? If I could have the next slide. So before you see a list of some of the components of sustainability. I read all of your responses in the chat a few minutes ago, and I believe that all of those are also what sustainability means. It's a wonderful term, it's a wonderful concept, and it really can be all encompassing. It's figuring out how we can make our outcomes last. It's making sure that we all stay employed if we want to stay employed where we're employed currently. It's making sure that our funding is stable, but it really is a lot bigger than just funding. You'll hear me say that a number of times throughout this conversation. If you have any other thoughts that you feel are missing from this list about what it is that sustainability means to you, feel free to throw those in the chat. Could I have the next slide? Okay, so when it comes to prevention, sustainability means that we are ready to adapt to whatever comes our way. We don't know what the funding gods will throw at us. We don't know who is going to leave their position when. We don't know what is going to change in terms of the political context. And so I think a lot about terms that we use when we talk about individual resiliency in people, particularly in young people. And I feel like there's a real parallel with sustainability of our initiatives and sustainability of our organizations. You know, it's really, do we have that resilience that we need to be ready for whatever comes our way? Next slide. Okay. And I want to apologize. I have a cold today, which you probably have heard already. I'm going to do my best to keep on talking, but if you see me mute for a minute, it's just a cough attack, and I will be back. So again, thinking specifically about prevention and what sustainability is in our field, it's making sure that we have a system that supports our long-term outcomes. We can keep running on the hamster wheel forever, but what we want to do is make sure that the impact we're having on the community stays, whether or not we're running on that wheel. And that really is, to me, the most important piece. It also involves, again, this piece about ongoing capacity and a resolve to work together. I feel like that is the resiliency. It's, do we have a team in place? Do we have the people that we need, the approaches that we need to improve health and quality of life for all? And the for all there is quite important. You'll hear the word equity throughout our presentation and the conversation today. But we're not thinking about this just in terms of a small slice of people or the people who happen to be engaged already in our efforts. It's really, how do we think about the whole community and impact on them? I'm sorry. And when it comes to substance misuse prevention, we really are thinking about those long-term outcomes. How do we make sure that rates stay low, that norms have changed, that people have new and improved beliefs about the harm of whatever we've been trying to tell them about, and that those changes stay after our work ends. Where can I have the next slide, please, Clara? Okay, and I think this might be it for me for now, but in order to achieve the outcomes that we want, in order to make the change that we're all hoping for in our communities, we really need to make sure that we have effective strategic planning processes. That means that we come together to plan collectively, that we think about things before they happen, that we have many voices at the table, and that those processes are messy, like they always are, because community work is complex, but also strategic. And we also want to make sure that we're doing interventions that work. We always intend to do that. Nobody starts working on something. None of us have begun a program thinking, I don't really think this is going to work. But the trick here is checking back in with ourselves. Are we meeting our benchmarks? Are we having the impact that we hoped for? And if we are, let's keep those interventions going. And lastly, back to the equitable approach, we want to be thinking about equity both in terms of who is part of our process and who we are impacting with our work. I think I'm handing it to Jessica now.
I think you are. Thanks so much, Emily. And hi, everyone. It's wonderful to be here with you today. So like Emily just said, we are framing sustainability today around sustaining our positive outcomes, which is sort of the natural end goal of what we're doing. And we're going to build the case that sustained outcomes are really at this nexus of the interventions that work and implementing effective processes that support those. And so for both our processes and interventions, the starting place will be to take an inventory of what already exists, what you're already doing within your organization, what your organization is leading, and then to figure out what to sustain, we have to gather some information and look critically at those processes and interventions to make decisions about which should be sustained. And so just to define terms, communities' strategic planning processes will include lots of different decisions and connections that have been made and that will continue to be made that help move prevention efforts forward. So processes around collecting and analyzing our needs assessment data, conducting outreach to new partners, or developing action plans. So as you're thinking about deciding which processes to sustain, we have to think about like what worked well, what doesn't work well, and are there any new processes that would need to be implemented to support your work. And so then interventions, the other side of the equation, includes all of our prevention programs, our strategies, services that we put in place to address our priority substance misuse problems. And so then when you've completed this inventory and literally written down each intervention, each process that are currently underway, we want to pay attention to the considerations on the screen, which are how effective the intervention has been in meeting its stated outcomes, the amount of capacity that you have organizationally or that your community has to continue that intervention, and then how much support exists for the intervention among the people you're trying to reach and engage and among the general public where you work. And so that's something you can do while working with your coalition or task force members to take stock of your current efforts and to figure out what's working for you, right? And really this means what's producing positive outcomes relating to your priorities. And so this might involve looking at your data. So you have existing data that you're collecting, or maybe you have to take into consideration collecting some additional data to determine effectiveness. But once you know what your most effective processes and interventions are that you're currently implementing, you can begin this process that we're about to introduce of planning to sustain them. So on the next side, what you'll see, you'll see the beginning or the steps in this 5-step sustainability process we're going to share today. And this is where you begin once you've taken that inventory. And I just want to say that it's no throwaway to inventory and prioritize what you're doing in terms of thinking about effectiveness. It takes time, it takes thoughtful consideration, but once you have sort of the short list of effective strategies and effective processes, we can move forward with planning around them. And we create that shorter list for the same reason we prioritize the issues that we address in communities, right? Because you can't do everything as much as you may want to. And similarly, we can't sustain everything, and nor should we, right? We only want to sustain, that which is moving our efforts forward in positive directions and producing positive results. So once you have that list in hand, you'd go through this process to develop a sustainability plan and see it through. And you can see the steps here. And this is actually really meant to take a group beyond just kind of thinking about sustainability, understanding it conceptually, but then actually to take action and to do the work of identifying and securing the resources that we need to maintain our outcomes beyond our current funding, right? We heard that in the initial question that we posed, right? It's not just about money, it's not just about funding, but it is about thinking about what we will do in the face of funding ending or funding loss. And we're going to talk about that, later on in today's session. But it's really meant to be an intentional, ongoing process, like virtually everything we do in prevention. Sustainability planning is going to be most effective when we do it in collaboration. And so we suggest before you would embark on this to put together a sustainability planning team. So thinking about who you can bring to the table that might have expertise in different areas that you need. So people really well versed in prevention science, some with budgeting knowledge and expertise or fundraising, communications, and then maybe folks who have worked with data and use data for decision-making purposes to help guide those parts of the conversation. And so this group would come together, start from a really solid shared understanding of what sustainability is, these different sustainability approaches we're going to introduce today, and talk through what they believe might help them to be most successful doing that work. And ideally, the group would be part of that inventorying process that precedes these 5 steps, looking at the interventions and processes to prioritize. But at the very least should be assembled by this point, just to make sure that you have all the brain power that you could possibly want and need to put together and implement your comprehensive plan. So on the next slide, we're going to walk step by step through that process. So here's step 1, determining your sustainability goals and approaches. And so all that level setting that you did with your team is going to bring you to this place where you're ready to use what you've learned about the prevention processes and interventions in your community to set goals. So you already have that list of what you believe is working for you. But this is a point in the process where you can be kind of discerning again and make any additional cuts to that short list, because or using a different set of criteria, right? And so generally, when you ask which interventions and processes would we write goals around, we want to write goals around those that are serving you well, right? I think as folks in the chat mentioned, but those that aren't as firmly established in your community. And so a good example of this would be if there is not another partner or organization, that's responsible to continue a particular intervention or process. So for example, if you were to work with local law enforcement, let's say to conduct compliance checks on a regular basis, but you're busy and let's say you forgot to reach out when you knew that you were due for another round of checks and the police department did it anyway, right? That would be a good indication that that strategy is already has that high likelihood of being sustained. So you wouldn't necessarily need to focus your sustainability efforts on an intervention that has that level of community support if you were to have this other partner, actively taking responsibility for its ongoing implementation or success, or that's ready to take that responsibility if the need arises. Just a plug here, though, for formalizing this type of arrangement with your partner organizations, if they're not already formalized, through kind of written agreements, memoranda of understanding, or agreement, right? Because so much of what we do here is relationship-based in this field. By formalizing it, really ensures that those interventions in question are going to continue regardless of any changes, like when we win the lottery and move to Paris, or unforeseen or avoidable changes in leadership or circumstance like that, you'll know that those efforts are going to continue as a matter of little p policy, because you've made it explicit in your agreement with your partner that they're going to carry them forward. And then you can devote your energy to creating some goals around the practices that are producing those outcomes you want to sustain, and that don't necessarily have that same level of support behind them to continue without your help. Right, so it's all about sort of getting that responsibility, in such a way that it's either not resting solely on you or your organization's shoulders, or that you have this very solid plan for, where the resources to sustain them will be coming from. So just a little bit more on the goals and approach. This slide is showing some of the characteristics of what we consider, solid sustainability goals, including being data informed, meaning that each of the goals should be based on objective data about what is working well in your community and not based on any of our assumptions or opinions or even individual preferences. And so by using data here to create goals for each of those prevention practices to sustain, we'll be able to support every sustainability decision that gets made with evidence. And then we want our goals to be realistic too. These are just like goals that we set, in other lanes in which we work, or even in other types of work that we do, right? We want to be realistic and reflect what we can reasonably expect to accomplish in our community. And again, it's probably better to set no more than 2 or 3 goals in total at a time. Even a few sustainability goals on top of everything else that you're already doing in your action plan will definitely give you plenty to keep your hands full. And then finally, the best goals are the ones that you share. And so here's an opportunity to make sure your full prevention task force and any other key community partners that you work closely with approve of the goals, get their buy-in early so that they'll be ready to work with you and your planning team when it comes time to work on meeting these goals down the road. So on the next slide, we can talk about a little bit of next two, which is to think about and narrow in on the types and the amount of resources that you're going to need in order to sustain your selected practices. This is really where I feel like this gets very tangible and concrete. I think, like Emily, I agree that sustainability is a wonderful concept. It's very all-encompassing. And sometimes for me, what that means is it doesn't feel all that easy to operationalize. And what this process does do is helps us, to be really strategic, be very concrete about what it is that we're hoping to obtain in the course of trying to sustain our outcomes. So the first step really is to think about writing down objectives. And because, when you're doing your goals, you're making them, you're making them shared, data informed, and everything else, and also as specific as possible is useful here too. But what an objective does is it helps to create more concrete milestones that have to be accomplished in order to meet the goals, and that helps you kind of hone in on what the specific resources that you need are going to be. And so, thinking about the projected cost of each of those resources is going to give you that ability to obtain exactly the amount of money or whatever else you need to be able to sustain each of your goals in practice. And so the trick here is to focus on the minimum amounts needed to achieve your sustainability goals, right? If you think about resources and you're budgeting too high, you may be less likely to secure the resources that you need. But if you're budgeting too low, then you wouldn't necessarily have what you need to effectively get the work done. So there's a sweet spot in this process where you need to figure out the amount of resources, and setting some objectives can really help you do that. And so let's say an organization writes the goal of having their local school district include a particular evidence-based program in the middle school core curriculum. So that's the goal, right? School district takes on a program, incorporating it into the middle school core curriculum. So if that's our goal, what might some of the objectives be that could go along with this goal? I'm going to think them through, but just as I do, we want our objectives to really be essential. So addressing only the activities that are fundamental to the work and to achieving the goal. Again, specific, clear language, concrete, measurable details, numbers, timeframes, and we want these to be realistic as well, right? Reasonable and achievable. So some objectives for that goal would be, maybe to provide monthly coaching and annual training for the program facilitators to make sure that we're monitoring fidelity to the program core components each year and working to maintain that fidelity. And then another objective could be to deliver the program to at least 80% of middle schoolers in each of the middle schools in the district every year, right? So that practice of objective setting, where you're breaking your goals down into these sort of deliverable milestone type chunks, can really help us uncover any hidden costs that might exist, and also ensure that you have this full understanding of the needed resources. And so then we think about resources here in terms of personnel. And that's all the people that you need to do the work to meet your objectives, staff, consultants, and similar. And then the non-personnel resources are really everything that those people are going to need to do the work well. And that can include things like supplies or meeting spaces, professional development, to keep their skills sharp. And so then when you think about those specific resources, you then start thinking about what you actually need to do to secure, or what we would need to secure in order to be able to implement those objectives. So to provide the monthly coaching and annual training for your program facilitators, how are you going to do it? Well, you need to hire a professional coach and trainer to do it, or are you going to have to pay for that training space or provide lunch to participants? So, having those objectives allows you to identify all the resources that you're going to need that are tied to them. And then also thinking about any kind of those overarching resources that are required across all goals, like shared personnel, like if you have an evaluation consultant maybe that you'll want to bring into this, or have to pay for a data analysis support or administrative support, office supplies, if you have a fundraising budget and you have a grant writer or do, annual appeals, things like that. So these types of resources that also support the work, but that aren't specifically tied to a particular intervention, but that would support all of them if you're able to maintain that level of resource. And so then you document the costs, right? And you might want to work with somebody who's experienced in developing and managing budgets if that's not something that you've had as much experience with. So to be able to determine how much of each resource you'll need. And again, here, you don't have to dream big, right? Just focus on that minimum needed to achieve your sustainability goals. And that makes it much more manageable, right? In my mind, like if I have this concrete number, it's not this exponential sum, it's something that is feasible to obtain that helps us in our planning to really think about the strategies we need to get it. And so, and just another kind of consideration, it does feel like a lot of work, right? I did say it's going to make it more concrete and you have to walk through these steps of the process in order to do it. But if you think about investing the time now, or at this point in a process, thinking about sustainability, think of all the time you're going to save in dealing with, funding applications or looking for new funding opportunities and competing for them. If in fact you've already gone through this process and come up with other sustainability approaches to support your work. So, it's sort of a pay now, pay later kind of schema to think about sustainability early on in our processes and not toward the end of a grant funding cycle where things can become more stressful and urgent, but to take the time now to kind of go through this thoughtful type of process. Okay, so documenting those costs again, thinking about adjusting for quantity, if you're going to increase staffing from part-time to full-time, that's going to change the amount of resources that you might need over time. But if you decide to print more posters one year than the year before, you might be able to get a bulk rate that would bring the cost of that resource down. Also thinking about, and this is very topical for us nowadays, inflation and increasing or accounting for that. We can't just plug in the same numbers year over year without recognizing that costs do change over time. And there's a lot of things that we're going to talk about today we can do to advance sustainability that don't cost a cent. So there's a lot of really valuable resources that we want to not take for granted that are out there that might be available to us. If we look, I'm sure many of you, when I talk about paying for space, think, of the donated space that you're able to use for meetings or events, which is a great example of those kind of zero cost options. And then so you can use all this information to make your sustainability budget, not suggesting that you create something entirely standalone from your existing organizational budget or have to start from scratch, but this might be a place to add some line items, into an existing budget to address and accommodate any new or required resources. But yeah, so hopefully this has helped a little bit to bring sustainability down out of the stratosphere of theory and abstraction and to make it really concrete. So you would sit down and go through that process of figuring out what it really takes you to do the work and figure out exactly what it costs so you can approach the rest of the process with clear and complete expectations of what's needed. And I see, Nancy, your question. It's a great question. I'm gonna put it in kind of my back pocket until the end of the call where we're gonna address many questions, but just what comes to mind right now is I don't have the answer for how to address it. Hopefully Emily will when we put her on the spot later, but more to account for it and plan for it as you're thinking about how much you'll need by way of resources. At this point in the planning process, it's more anticipating that there could be rising costs, but your point in your question is really well taken and apropos that we should talk about this here as well, because it's what we're all encountering. So more on that to come. And then on the next slide, you'll see thinking about the partners, about who can help you, right? And it's really critical for sustainability success. All the different organizations in your professional orbit are potential partners, and you probably have existing relationships with lots of them in your community. Some may represent different sectors, right? So parents or youth serving organizations. Some may bring different skill sets that you need, communication experts or fiscal managers. And then some might also have relationships and connections with others that can help you get what you need. And these might be, some of your decision makers, your community leaders, champions that are really invested in your work. And so, I don't have to tell you that developing and maintaining those partnerships are definitely key to a strong sustainability plan. And any time that you spend deepening those relationships with key partners are going to serve you well when it comes to engaging them in sustainability efforts. And so, this team approach where you can help partners see themselves as a member of your organization's inner circle is a great way of helping them to feel more essential to and invested in your work, and then maybe more likely to want to help you sustain your efforts by being directly involved in them. Enhancing a focus on capacity building, providing lots of opportunities to build their understanding of what prevention is and effective prevention is, and the need for the involvement of multiple community sectors. And so then they, again, see themselves in your work. I just did a training actually with a coalition near me, and we called it, "What is your why?" And it was really meant to do exactly this, help the coalition members, see themselves as integral to the work, connect to their motivation for being involved, and think about what more they could bring to the coalition by overcoming, barriers to their participation, and then also how they benefited from their involvement in the coalition and how it could feed them more. And so it was really this nice bi-directional conversation about how to maximize everybody's experience, and leverage these assets and resources at the table. And it was really well received by those in attendance, which was really nice. And so in terms of those benefits to partner engagement, how can you make it easier for partners to be involved in your efforts? What do they stand to gain from their participation? Having those answers ready will help make the case for their involvement and hopefully circumvent any obstacles in their path. And we know that they bring so much more than funding to the table, all the things that we've already listed: access, information, lived experience, time and energy. All of these are really important resources as well. And so you be expansive in your thinking about what partners can bring to the table, list them out, those partners you already have, those you want to pursue. And for current partners, you can assess the quality of your relationship and involvement with them by asking some questions like, how is it going? How is your collaboration going? Is it effective? Is it still relevant? What kind of prevention resources are you currently sharing with them? Are there other resource gaps that the partner could help you fill? And then again, what's the benefit to them in participating with you and collaborating with you? And so you could also create a collaboration map, which is a really nice tool to help graphically depict an organization's relationships with other entities in its community. And then that can help create a shared understanding of who these people are, these organizations are, strength of the partnership. And based on that information, it can help you determine how to allocate your time and effort to develop relationships in support of those sustainability goals that you've set. And I should mention that this whole process I'm walking you through right now is spelled out in detail in our sustainability planning tool. It's called Strategies for Prevention Sustainability, and we're going to share this out as a resource again after today's session. So that has lots more detail about each of these steps and some nice worksheets also to help you walk through them. And so then on the next slide, you'll have to make an ask at some point, right? And that is to really request a commitment from a potential partner to do something. So it's never too early really to enlist the right partners in your effort. And to do it well, you have to develop your compelling argument, your elevator pitch for why they should say yes. And that's why this is part of our sustainability planning process, is to get those resources. We got to get people to say yes to us. And so, an elevator pitch, you've probably heard that term many times. It's just meant to remind us here that the pitches, these requests should be really succinct, like the elevator doors are about to open at any moment and your prospective partner is going to walk away without the information you wanted to share, without you having made your request. I actually did have to do an elevator pitch, though, once in an actual elevator, so it does happen. And so when it's time to, bring this all home by making your ask, you want to figure out, who are the people you can contact at that organization that you can, reach out to, who is going to reach out to them from your group, right? Based on who in your group may have existing relationships with them or familiarity with their work, a level of comfort in doing this type of outreach and meeting and talking to new people. You develop your talking points. So, you describe who you are, what you're hoping to accomplish and why, and what the need is, the specific support that you're hoping for. And then you would hold these exploratory conversations depending on how your contact wants to interact. And then you prepare your formal requests, right? You want to put together all the information that they might need to make a decision, develop your materials if you're going to do a written letter, a proposal, a presentation, and make sure that you're talking about your sustainability goal that they're going to be a part of, a partner to you in, why they should care. So what is the compelling reason that they should care about what you're doing? And then that really specific ask, like, what is it that you want from them, and make it as specific as possible so they can know whether they can say yes or no. Do we have any examples of a collaboration map? It sounds very interesting. We actually have a very nice example in our toolkit that we will share out. If that, I don't think we have one in the presentation today, but we'll make sure that you have that. It's linked here on the slide, so we can send that along as soon as possible so you can see what we're talking about when we say collaboration map. But it's really just a way of sort of visually depicting the closeness of relationships, the strength of the relationships between organizations, and then being able to look at everything kind of as a constellation, determine where you might need to invest more time to nurture a relationship versus you have this very strong existing partnership with an organization, you're working together well, and then you don't have to devote as much energy and effort to maintaining it because it's already in such good shape. But yeah, that is an example we can share there through our tool that we're going to share out after today's session. Okay, and so on the next slide, this is our last step, step 5, and this is just about, monitoring the process after you've made your asks, right? You identified your goals, you came up with how many resources you need, you figured out who could help you in the process, you came up with what the specific asks were that you wanted to make, and so now you have this plan that you're working through and you're monitoring your progress as you go on and try to do these ongoing sustainability efforts. So monitoring always is helpful because it lets you address challenges that come up before they become real obstacles. It helps us have accountability, so we make sure that we're all doing what we said we were going to do. Hopefully members of your sustainability planning team are taking on pieces of the work, right? And so it helps us make sure that we're all doing what we said we were going to do, tracking which requests that we made are granted and which ones are not and have to be followed up on. And then it also lets us capture any lessons learned to strengthen our institutional memory and help us continue to make progress over time, find ways that we can overlap with other organizations and find new opportunities for collaboration. And so some ways to monitor progress, is making sure that somebody is there to oversee, oversee the plan. And it's really helpful when one person is responsible versus we're all responsible, but no one holds the process. Convening regular calls or meetings with people engaged in moving it forward, as deadlines approach, or actually creating a virtual calendar with reminders of upcoming deadlines for doing each of these sustainability tasks. And then, posting the plan where everyone is involved can see it and sharing new information as it comes in. I actually worked with a coalition near me that embedded their sustainability plan elements into their action plans. So they didn't risk losing track of the goals and the action steps they had articulated with, specifically for sustainability purposes on top of everything else that they had to do. And so those are just some ways that you can monitor over time. And certainly as you do, you'll see those successes beginning to roll in, and ideally we'll take time to celebrate those successes along the way. People are really excited to be part of this important work in the hopes that it will be sustained. And so, we have to make this concerted effort to maintain the level of energy and involvement and momentum over time, and celebrating your wins as you monitor your progress is a real solid way to do that. Okay, so that's a lot from me on this process. And on the next slide, you'll see an acronym that we're going to introduce. And we've talked about and around several different types of sustainability approaches, but now this is going to really tie them all together. It's a wonderful framework called the PAIRS model. And PAIRS introduces these different avenues that prevention practitioners can explore to reach their sustainability goals, with each letter in the acronym standing for a different approach. I want to invite Emily back into the conversation on the next slide, because I happen to know that PAIRS is one of Emily's favorite models in prevention. So I wondered if I could invite you in to walk us through what each letter stands for.
Thanks, Jessica. This is indeed one of my favorite tools for working on sustainability planning. And Jessica and I both learned this approach from a woman named Cynthia Barger in Cambridge, Massachusetts, who shared it with us very generously, and we've been using it ever since. So I want to take you, I want you to think about those 5 steps that Jessica just laid out, and step back to stage 1, even before you've decided, when you're in the process of deciding what it is that you would like to sustain, and before you figured out what it will take to sustain that. I'm so sorry about the cough. That is the moment when I like to use the PAIRS tool to help a group, whether it's me or someone else, think more expansively about what the options are. So if I sat down when I knew that I'm running a $100,000 program that has 2 staff and needs space for programming, I can make that list of what my resources need to be to maintain it very easily. I need $100,000. That includes 2 staff people. I also need space to run my program. But PAIRS is a way to first say, wait a minute, let's consider all of the many ways that this might be sustained. And so I'm going to go through each of them, and we can talk about examples as we move forward. But P is for either pass it off. Here it says pass off. I always think of it as pass it on. So if we've been holding something as an organization or as a director, as a program, it doesn't have to stay ours forever. There might be a natural home for it where it can live happily ever after, and someone else who either has been a part of it in the past or just has the same goals that we have can take it on. Sometimes it's a better fit because they have more resources, or I think about an organization I used to work with that was doing restorative justice work, and they were doing it in the community, and they were losing their space, and they realized that they could house the program in the police station. And all of a sudden, they got tremendous buy-in from the police officers who were bringing them the cases that then they were using a restorative justice approach with. They had much more active collaboration. They didn't have to work as hard on the referrals, and they had the kind of continuity of follow-up that they had always hoped for. So that's a space passing on, but in general, a whole initiative can be passed on. Policy is the other definition for P. And Jessica alluded to this earlier. She talked about how sometimes we can make something permanent by writing it down and by having everyone agree to it. When something that we've been pushing for in the schools makes its way into the handbook, then everyone is in charge of enforcing it, and we don't have to be there wagging our finger forever. Sometimes it's a little P policy, like that one with the handbook. Sometimes it's actually a legislative change that can make something we've been working for permanent. So that's a really wonderful way to do sustainability. Earn is a way to help us think about whether there are opportunities to actually have the thing we're trying to do support itself, or even earn us money beyond what it needs. So, for example, I think about some of the community building initiatives that I see. You're trying to build partnerships, and maybe there's a way to do a gala that everyone has to pay for an expensive ticket, and you cover your costs, but you even earn more. But then you have the money for the next time. So it can be small scale, it can be large scale. It doesn't always have to be a gala, but sometimes there are ways to actually have youth programs earn money through what they're doing, that then gets channeled, pumped back into the prevention pipeline. Ask is where our traditional grant writing falls, because we can go back to the same funders we've always had or new ones, and we can say, here's my proposal. Here's the problem I see. Here's what I want to do about it. I would like you to fund us. That's an ask. And we're already quite skilled at it. But as we know, it's not always the most sustainable version of continuing our efforts. And there are other things we can ask for too. So Jessica talked earlier about the spaces that people can often donate for our meetings. Asks can get really tiny. You can ask people for their signature on a petition. You can ask people to give you the copy paper that you can't afford. You can ask people what they have in their programs or their organizations that they might be able to contribute that you might not even have thought of. And then reconfigure is actually, I'm going to skip that for a second. I'm going to say S is share. So the same way that pass it on is about handing off either an initiative or a program to someone else. Share is sort of the halfway version of that. You still want to keep some of the responsibility for it, some of the leadership, some of the delivery, but there's another organization or another group or another person that could share it with you, and it can really reduce the burden. So back to reconfigure. Reconfigure, I usually think of it as redevelop. It is our chance to think completely out of the box. And this one, I like for programs, I like for strategies, but I also particularly like for outcomes. So if there's something that we have accomplished in our community, there's a change that we've made, and we want to say, how can we keep that in place? It might not look the same as it did last year. Maybe we don't need to do that program the same way. Maybe we don't need to have the same people involved. Maybe there's a whole new approach that could have just as much impact or could maintain what we've done, support the change now that it's in place. And this is one that you can't really think about once you've already jumped into trying to refund what you're doing, right? So this is a chance to get away from just asking for the same $100,000 every year from the same people. And it's tricky. I've worked with many coalitions and organizations on sustainability planning. And when you sit down with two people to think through pairs, you get very different answers than when you sit down with 10 or 15, because this is really a brainstorming process. And when you ask 15 people to think out of the box on how are we going to keep this thing alive, or how are we going to keep this impact in place, they come up with some really kooky and wonderful ideas and can build on each other's thoughts in a way that maybe I, as the leader, would never come up with alone. So I encourage you to pull this out before you start your step 2 and see where it takes you. You know, it can be a really loose conversation, or it can be very I mean, sometimes I make a chart, you know, here's the thing we want to sustain. What are our P ideas? What are our E ideas? What are our A ideas? What are our R and what are our S? And I get this huge grid of ideas. And sometimes it's much more loose, but both work. And I really think it helps to shake us out of our belief that all we need to do is ask for the same money again and again. I'm happy to take questions on that because I really like putting this into practice, but I think we should probably move on to the interview between me and Jessica, and then we'll have lots of time for Q&A. But if you have any questions about pairs and its application, maybe throw them in the chat for now.
That's a great idea, Emily. Thank you for walking through the model. I can't remember if Cynthia taught me directly or if you taught me this model, but it's absolutely one of my, I think it's like a hidden gem in prevention, honestly, because it really does kind of lay it all out for you so well. I just want to call attention to a note in the chat from Lisa, and thanks so much, Lisa, for sharing it, that your community held a gala to celebrate the coalition's 10th anniversary, all of its accomplishments. The second goal was to convince the newer town manager how much your coalition was valued in town, and to help them see the value of keeping the former manager's process to fully fund your coordinator, and it worked. That's wonderful. That's such a great example. So thanks for sharing. If others have examples too, you want to share, feel free. Absolutely love to hear them. And Nancy, great question. So it's Cynthia Barger was the person who we worked with in this part of the world who taught the Paris model to the group that we were working with. And that's Bargar, I think, Emily, is that right?
That's correct. And she does a lot of development work. So she was sharing this in the context of thinking about fundraising and thinking about new directions that you could take a program in before you did the fundraising work.
Nice. Thank you. Thanks for that context. All right, so I think, no further ado, the time has come. We're going to shift gears a little bit and have more of a conversation. And so we're going to stop sharing our slides. There we are. Hi, Emily. And just bring our faces up and walk through a few interview questions we thought it might be interesting to explore. I'll be the interviewer, and Emily is going to share of her extensive experience and knowledge. And so, Emily, could you start off by telling us about what types of organizations that you've worked with on sustainability planning?
Absolutely. I have worked with a variety of organizations. I would say most of the groups that I've supported with sustainability planning have been community coalitions, and I know a lot of you represent community coalitions working on prevention. So that's my favorite priority group for sustainability work. But I've also worked with small nonprofits. I've worked with, I did sustainability planning with a coalition of organizations that were working on research on diversity and elder health. I've worked with many small organizations, but I also have done my own sustainability planning in multiple roles. So I have worked with very small and medium-sized organizations and needed to take those groups through sustainability planning.
Nice. Okay, so lots of experience. We can see why we invited you into this session to share with us, and lots of different types of groups and focus areas. So I'm curious to know, how does your approach to sustainability planning align or diverge from the model that we just shared?
I think that in general, it aligns very closely, but there are I'm not sure that this is a divergence, but I definitely spend a lot of time and energy on the prioritizing of what to sustain, because I have found again and again that if the list is too long, it becomes overwhelming and it doesn't feel like a good use of everyone's time. When you're doing sustainability planning in order to just build your sustainability capacity, nobody wants to spend days and weeks and months just thinking sustainability all the time. So I really feel like it's that piece of narrowing in and saying, what are the pieces that we want to sustain that sort of drives the process forward? Because once everyone's bought into the importance of those elements, then planning for their sustainability is natural. The other piece where I think I diverge a little bit is that all of the language in the toolkit and in the 5 steps that you presented are really about maintaining interventions and processes. And while those are important, I do tend to focus more on the outcomes and sustaining the outcomes. And I think it is a great thing when we can pat ourselves on the back and say that outcome is in place. Check, I'm done with that. You know, when working in prevention, especially in TA and technical assistance, but in prevention in general, you know, we talk about trying to put ourselves out of business. You know, it would be a wonderful day when nobody needed us anymore. And I think sustainability is a little bit like that. You know, if we do it well, no one notices because everything is stable and stays stable and just keeps on chugging. And so I think the more we can say we've succeeded at that outcome is in place, that lets us move on to our next piece of work. And it doesn't necessarily mean that we've failed. It means that we've succeeded. So I like to think about it that way.
I think it's beautiful framing and absolutely agree. And I think I think there's sort of this visual we hold in our minds of, outcomes at this pinnacle of a triangle that involves the processes and interventions that, will lead to them. So I think you're taking it a step further to say, like, we've done that work, right? We've implemented those processes and those interventions, and now that outcome is fully affixed within our community, and then we can now use that energy elsewhere. I think for today, maybe we're talking about how we get to that point that you're holding up to us as this sort of vision that we're going to move toward. Do you think that's fair? I don't want to put words in your mouth.
Yeah, no, I think that's very fair. And I think it's, we're going to come up with a list of many outcomes during any sustainability planning process that we haven't achieved. So
Right.
I don't think we're ever going to say we're finished. I just think it's nice to be able to say, look at our accomplishments. We accomplished that outcome, or there's a whole new way that we can maintain that outcome that has nothing to do with keeping the program running for another 7 years.
Exactly. No, well said. And thank you for that too, because I think I probably made this point, if I made it once, I made it too quickly, that, it's not about just working within what you're already doing, right? That's that whole idea of reconfiguring. Is there another way to sustain this outcome that we haven't thought about, but that might be even more sustainable than what we're currently doing? So this is wonderful. I have to ask you my next question. I want to set it up. We all know that not everyone loves this type of process. Some people actively dislike and avoid these types of processes. So I'm just wondering how you might, pitch the value of this type of planning to someone who questions it or feels like they don't have time for it.
That's a great question. And I have met many of those people who don't want to spend time on sustainability planning, also on evaluation design, which I also love. I think I have been in the position of doing sustainability planning with groups that are doing it proactively and with groups that are in crisis. And I can tell you that doing it in crisis is harder, is more stressful, is no fun at all. And doing it ahead of time might feel like a little bit of a slog, but it sets you up for success. And it's worth the investment to know what you're gonna do if there is a change. And it's not always a crisis that causes a change. I was saying right before we invited you all into the meeting, I was telling the other facilitators that that having this terrible cold today made me realize that I'm doing sustainability planning all the time. And I have backup plans and I have ways to get myself through these crises. Like I had a webinar to give today and I needed to be able to talk and be awake for it. And I had my medicine sitting on the shelf, just there waiting. I had some cough medicine, I had some cough drops, I had my honey in my tea. I have it all spread in front of me. But I also was building relationships and working closely with Jessica and Clara on the development of the slides so that I knew that if I needed to step out today and say, I absolutely cannot do this, one of them would have been able to make my points and share my stories. And that's all sort of the investment that it takes to not have the moment of crisis feel completely crushing and overwhelming.
Is that a metaphor or an analogy? I think it's a metaphor and I love it.
That's a metaphor, yeah.
I love it. And you absolutely win the champion award for today for staying with us, given that you're not feeling well, and turning it into a metaphor during a training, which is also not unlike Emily, if you know Emily at all. So let me just ask you to follow up on your comments around planning in crisis versus when an organization is sort of in calm and stable waters. Are there certain differences in terms of how it looks or plays out in your experience? Say a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I think there are huge differences because one, you're doing in a rush. When you're in crisis, you have less options. So, I mean, that's a big statement, but it's true. when you think back to what it takes to be that resilient organization or that resilient program, you need to have strong working relationships with all of your partners. You need to have systems in place. You need to have evaluation metrics. You need to have all of these things that take tremendous time and energy to establish. You need to have funding. And if you need funding from today till tomorrow, you're not going to be able to get it. I mean, we all know that funding cycles are easily 6 months, if not multiple years, for a lot of the sources that we turn to for prevention dollars. So, you know, if we're planning and if we're doing sustainability planning in crisis mode, those are off the table. We can't have new partners that we develop relationships right then with. We also can't look for dollars from new sources. So all of a sudden we're left with whatever we've already built. And when we're doing sustainability planning, when we're not in crisis mode, the world's our oyster. We can have whatever dream we want, and we can make it reality by approaching those new organizations and building the partnerships that are slow and need trust. And we can take the time that it needs.
So something interesting I just want to share with the group is that you actually hired me into the field of prevention many years ago. And we worked together at an organization that provided training and technical assistance, consultation, and coordination to local prevention organizations within our state. And this organization was called the Regional Center for Healthy Communities. And we, at the regional center we worked at, it was actually part of a larger system of centers that made up the substance misuse prevention capacity building infrastructure really for our state. And I'll never forget it because I was fresh out of school, and it was August of 2011. And I was interviewed and hired on to the regional center. And not long after, we found out that our funder had decided to change, its strategic approach related to providing technical assistance, and it released a new funding opportunity and call for proposals. And lots of other regional centers within our system decided to compete for that new funding, but our center did not. And instead, we went through a very thoughtful, multifaceted sustainability planning process that you led. And it was really what was a time of crisis for us, because I think we had maybe 9 or so months from when our center was informed that we were no longer going to be funded to when the end of our fiscal year was going to come up. And so that's the setup. And I wanted to just ask you to share your thoughts about that process, add anything I missed, and let us know what you think from your perspective worked well or didn't work well, or lessons that you remember learning, at the time or now learning back about doing sustainability process for that group.
So it makes my heart race just to remember those months. And I would like to share with the group that this was not the end of a contract cycle. So our funding was eliminated. The contract was ended early. So we didn't have the normal ramp up time that you do when you know that you might be refunded, but you might not. That was a challenging period, and as you know, and I think that some of what I said earlier was relevant then. We really had to focus in on what were the pieces that we needed to sustain. And part of that process was thinking about what were we uniquely providing. So what wouldn't be provided to the community under the new version of the contract? What were we doing that no one else in the region was doing? What were we doing that no one in the state was doing? How could we keep providing the services that we provided, but also, again, the outcomes? There were partnerships that existed because of us. How could we make sure that those were maintained? As the director of the center, I was very concerned about the continuity for my staff, you included. And we looked to many, many organizations that we had worked with over the years to try to say, here's the situation. We have this wonderful team with this amazing set of skills. How do our skills align with your goals? And can we be part of your team? Can I hand people over? Can we do our work in your space? Can we merge can we work toward collective impact in a new way? And I think that even though Some of the staff positions stayed within the same host organization that had held the center. Those conversations were really fruitful, and sometimes the partners that we had couldn't take staff, but they took other parts of our work. We had an amazing resource library, a health resource library that we managed and maintained. And we found another organization to take it, another library to add it to their collection, so that the resources would still be available. It wasn't just a matter of where do we put these books, but we want them to be well used. Yeah, that was a big year, and I don't know what else to say about it, but maybe we should move into questions and people can ask about that process, among others.
I think that's a great idea, and just a real introduction for me, new to the field, in terms of what it looks like to do such a thoughtful process, very collaborative. All the members of the center participated really actively and made decisions by consensus, I remember. So I just always think back to it as, learning to drive in the snow, as we say around here a little bit. And as far as my prevention journey has gone. But just like you said, we have some time now for questions from the audience. So we do welcome anyone on the line to share any questions or comments that you may have. I see we have some questions already in the chat, and Colleen, thank you for your comments as we were talking. Yes. We hope that sustainability planning isn't painful, but it may not always be fun for everybody involved, whether or not it's a calm time or a time of crisis. But absolutely echo your commentary about community buy-in, for gaining support, and thinking about anticipating each year, and that's a real way of keeping sustainability planning at the top of mind. Throughout the course of your work. So I just want to also add that we invited folks to share questions during the registration process, and we actually got quite a few excellent submissions there. So as you're thinking about your questions on the line right now, we're going to get to as many as we can, both those that we received beforehand and those that we received here today. But if we don't get to your question today, I just want you to know, so not worry, we have your name, your email addresses. For anyone who asked a registration question, if you don't hear it answered here in real time, we'll follow up with you. And if today we're not able to get to all the questions that are asked, we absolutely will do the same. All right, so here's one from the registration. So how are sustainability plans different from a program strategic plan? Emily, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, hopefully both your sustainability plan and your strategic plan are strategic. But I think of the strategic plan as sort of a beefed up action plan. This is what we're doing, and this is what's driving it, and this is what we hope will change as a result. I just summarized a logic model there, but that's the strategic plan is what are we doing and why, and what will change. The sustainability plan, on the other hand, is really about it's some of the same questions. It's what are we doing to build our capacity and increase our resilience to be ready in the case of a change. Jess, you mentioned earlier that that one group you worked with built their sustainability goals into their action plan, and I think sustainability can be part of your strategic plan. And I know here in Massachusetts we do a lot of work to build capacity building goals into strategic plans as well in the prevention world. So these things don't exist in isolation, because what we do to build capacity builds our sustainability, and what we do in terms of reaching some of our outcomes and doing our interventions also helps to sustain the healthy community goals that we have. So they're not separate, but the plans themselves can exist either in isolation or linked together by integrating one into the other.
Well said. I've often thought that if it's this way, it's a strategic plan, and if it's this way, it's a logic model, because it's often the same kind of information, just organized into different forms, not necessarily. Go ahead.
I think of the logic model as the picture of the strategic plan. Right.
Exactly, right? So a lot of this, and it's a great question, a lot of the information, will overlap and reinforce, but I think you're right, like the focus here is different. it's different than what you would do during strategic planning. So that's great. Here's another question that we heard from registration. So what are some of the ways that a coalition can maintain itself after its originators have left the coalition? So the people with the, you know, the vision and the passion who began that coalition have moved on, and there's another group of visionary, passionate people there, but maybe struggling with some of the sustainability work that we're hoping to do.
Yeah, this happens all the time. I'm sure if I asked for a show of hands, most of us would have been through a transition in leadership. And there are so many micro transitions along the life cycle, throughout the life cycle of a coalition or an organization, right? You have a founder leaving, you have new staff transitioning in and out, you have new funding streams coming in, you have new political climates where you have to focus in different directions. And I think one of the key pieces involved in having in a successful transition from one leader to either collective leadership or a new one is making sure that that the inner workings of the coalition are transparent, so that along the way everybody knows what's being done, so that when one person steps away, and why, so that when one person steps away, there's buy-in from the whole group about what still needs to happen and why, and how. But I also think that there's an opportunity to again focus on the outcomes, you know, with the whole group, and have the group say together, okay, you know, this one person and their original vision are leaving, but, you know, what is it that we still want to accomplish? What are the changes that we hope to see? And do we have a new way to get there? Do we all have to step up? Do we have to find a new leader? Do we have to make other changes, do things in a new way? But I think as long as the process is collective, it can be successful.
That's great to hear. And thank you for that. And Claire, thank you.
Yeah, sorry, I was just looking at Claire's comment as well about having
right ahead.
a succession plan. Claire, do you want to speak to that out loud?
Well, I would just say that what I have seen is, because I'm in New Jersey, and in New Jersey, there really are a lot of, a number of, in each county, there's like usually one coalition that is known by everybody, and they have been around for a long time. And what I have seen is the people who are running them tend to do like a year-long transition plan that involves bringing the individual that's going to be their replacement at a given forum, meeting, other coalition, to their, you know, maybe their state representative. They sort of break up the functions of that they've been, you know, doing for forever, and the person that's taking it over, you know, kind of almost like sistering in building, you know, like when you have a, you know, they do it that way, and then excuse me, it seems to function that those one or two people are no longer the name and face of that organization. People get a different vibe.
Yeah, thank you. That's a really good point. And Colleen is sharing in the chat that annual nominations for leadership roles can help make sure that there's more than one informed leader and that other people are ready to step up. This is sort of a micro example, but in the PTA in my children's school, for a while, there was a board that would have to be reelected every 3 years, and it was a complete changeover. And we changed the structure so that every 2 years, half of the positions rotate. And then that means that 2 people who know how things work stay on and 2 new come on. And then that little bit of a rolling change in leadership can be a really nice way to similarly not have it be one person and then another person or just a vacuum. There are so many answers to that, but I think it really depends on the personalities also in the group.
I think that that's very real. So thank you both for that. And next question that we had from the registration, but also anyone with questions, please do feel free to jump in the chat, because we want to definitely prioritize any that we get in real time as well. So do you feel like the pinnacle for sustainability is nonprofit status for a coalition?
Absolutely not. I think if it's a goal for a good reason, then more power to you, and become a nonprofit. That is a great thing to do if there's a reason. But being a nonprofit organization comes with its own set of requirements, and often means that you have infrastructure to pay for. So over time, you're going to be stuck in the same cycle of looking for dollars to keep doing what you're doing. I think when I think about what the pinnacle is in my head for a coalition, it's a super engaged, super diverse cross-section of the community who will step up and take on, you know, change initiatives on their own, and know how to grab each other when they need each other's help for them. And I think often that is a much more nebulous and less expensive version of a system than your standard nonprofit. So that's just my vision. I don't know if everybody shares it, but I also think that I understand that there are coalitions that function with fiscal agents or fiscal sponsors who would like to have the independence to work on their own. And so if that's important, then going through the process of becoming a nonprofit can help.
Mm-hmm. That's great. And I know we're winding down in terms of the time left in our session, so I want to not lose sight of the question that Nancy, you asked earlier around how to kind of think about inflation as far as sustainability planning goes. I know you had acknowledged that everything was costing more. I don't know, Emily, do you have thoughts about that? I think I offered my best idea earlier in the conversation.
To plan for it. I mean, unfortunately, I think inflation, like a lot of the other contextual changes that we work within, isn't something that we can control directly. So I agree with what you said earlier, that we have to be aware that it's happening. We have to be ready for it. And within the constraints of a grant, we're really limited because the grant amount stays the same for the life of that grant, and yet our costs for every element increase. And I mean, it's easier said than done, but I do think that budgeting for that inflation in the very early stages of the grant can work. You know, building yourself a little buffer in those first few years that you're using for something like supplies that then ultimately becomes what you need for the inflation and everything else and all the other lines can help. But I do think that ask piece in the pairs becomes our friend when we need to, when we're stuck, when we have costs that are ballooning and we just don't have the dollars to handle them. You know, it's a really nice opportunity to reach out to all our partners and say, this is too hard. You know, can you bring the paper cups and I'll bring the paper plates, and you know, those things add up. That's the only thing I can think of.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Emily. And no, absolutely. It's something very different, I think, than the context that many of us have, you know, are used to working in or have only operated in, you know, if we've not been in the field for very long. So, so Nancy, just seeing and lifting up your comment that not been anything that we've experienced for many years. And it's not an easy thing to think about how to address, but hopefully, you know, we can make the case that anticipating, and I think this comment was made by someone else, kind of thinking about these types of possibilities regularly and planning for them is at least one way to not be caught off guard. But there wasn't a way to really anticipate this, I think, unless we were doing just that and trying to anticipate all manner of different pitfalls that we might encounter. So I think in the interest of time, I'm going to hand this back over to you, Claire, to wrap us up.
Yes, thank you very, very much. Thanks, Jess. Thanks, Emily. Thanks, Clara, behind the scenes, making it all work. Thank you, everyone, for being here. We have to wrap up because we're about to get kicked off. If you could please take a moment to do the GIPRA survey, we'd really appreciate it. I'll be sending out within the week. I'll send out the slides, your certificates of attendance, and later after that, we'll be able to get the actual recording to you. But in the slides, one of the slides that you didn't see because of time will be a list of resources, and it will include the collaboration map and some other things. Please feel free to ask questions. Please email me. Within the slides also will be contact information for Jess. So we hope that this has been a good experience for you and a good setup for you, that the information has been helpful. We will get back to those folks who asked questions within the registration and we were not able to answer them in the context here today. Communication. We'll get back to you via email. So that's all we have for you except for our thanks. And I'll also send out some information about how to sign up for next week's course if you are interested. And that's it for us.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks very much. Take care.
Have a good afternoon. We'll leave the room open for just another moment in case you're taking the survey.